The stars above were different here, alien and unfamiliar, like scattered embers across the night. She lay motionless in the barren terrain, her breath shallow, golden skin marred by fresh cuts and bruises. Every fiber of her being pulsed with pain, and the weight of her journey bore down on her, threatening to snuff out her last shred of hope. Her people would not come for her. She was too far from any known outpost, and in their world, to be lost was to be forgotten. And then, as if the universe had not abandoned her entirely, a low hum sounded nearby, slicing through the desolate silence. She forced her eyes open just enough to see a figure stepping out of a small, boxy craft that hovered mere inches from the ground. The figure moved cautiously toward her, and she watched as it became clearer. 2 arms, 2 legs, broad shoulders. A human. For a moment, she hesitated. Humans were known for their recklessness, their voracious hunger for the stars, and the chaos they often left in their wake. But her body ached too deeply to care about the risks of trusting one. She needed help, or she wouldn't survive. The human knelt beside her, his features softened by the pale light of distant moons. He studied her face, concern etched into his expression. He murmured something soft, a string of words in his strange tongue, before extending a hand. Though his language was unfamiliar, the warmth in his voice conveyed his intention. As he leaned closer, she felt a strange sensation, a subtle, inexplicable connection. Despite their differences, an invisible thread seemed to bind them in that moment. With a gentle touch, he wrapped her arm around his shoulder, lifting her carefully from the hard ground. She winced but said nothing, gritting her teeth as he helped her toward his ship. Inside, he guided her to a small bench, adjusting his controls as they left the desolate surface. She felt the shift in gravity as they rose through the atmosphere, the landscape below disappearing beneath a curtain of clouds. He handed her a container of water, his eyes never leaving her face. She drank, savoring the coolness as it soothed her parched throat. Days passed in a quiet, tentative routine. He bandaged her wounds, offered her food, and tended to her without asking for anything in return. And in return, she shared fragments of her world with him, tracing constellations on the viewport, telling tales of vibrant planets and brilliant suns. They exchanged few words, but every gesture, every shared glance, seemed to hold entire conversations. One evening, as the stars hung heavy outside, he sat across from her, a question lingering in his eyes. She understood what he wanted to know, the question that had been there since he first found her. Why was she there, alone and wounded? She drew in a deep breath, finding words he might understand, though it was difficult in his language. She explained that she had been a part of a convoy, a diplomatic envoy meant to bridge alliances between worlds. But something had gone wrong. She had been separated from her people, forced to crash on the barren moon where he had found her. As she spoke, he listened intently, his face a mask of sympathy and intrigue. She sensed no judgment, no fear, only understanding. When she finished, he placed a hand over his heart, as if to reassure her that she was safe with him. But safety, she knew, was fleeting. Despite the peace they had found in each other's company, there were still dangers lurking in the shadows of space. Her people would not be able to track her, but there were others, hostile forces who might not be so forgiving of a human's kindness toward an alien. The days continued to pass, and a quiet bond grew between them. They found themselves drawn to each other in a way that transcended language, culture, and even the divide of their different worlds. It was as if they had known each other long before they had met, as if their souls had brushed in the stardust of forgotten galaxies. But the calm was shattered one morning when an alarm blared through the ship. Her heart pounded as they looked at the view screen, where the outline of a sleek hostile ship had appeared, blocking their path. The insignia on its hull was one she recognized all too well, an aggressive faction known for its merciless pursuit of power. They would not hesitate to capture or kill anyone who dared to stand in their way. The human's face hardened as he assessed the threat, his fingers dancing over the controls. With a swift movement, he took her hand, a silent promise that he would do everything in his power to protect her. She tightened her grip, drawing strength from his courage. They launched into evasive maneuvers, the ship lurching from side to side as he navigated through a deadly hail of energy blasts. The air was thick with tension as he pushed the ship to its limits, weaving between bursts of fire that illuminated the dark expanse like silent explosions. She could feel his heartbeat echoing through their clasped hands, his focus unbreakable. Finally, with one last burst of speed, they managed to escape, the hostile ship disappearing into the distance. Exhausted but victorious, they slumped against each other, sharing a silent moment of relief. He looked at her, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, and she returned it, grateful beyond words for his bravery. They spent the remaining days in quiet companionship, savoring the small moments that made up their journey. As they approached a station where she could finally contact her people, they both knew their time together was drawing to an end. Yet, there was an unspoken promise between them, a hope that this parting was not forever. When the time came, he helped her down the gangway, his hand lingering in hers for just a moment longer than necessary. She looked back at him, her heart heavy with the weight of unspoken words. He had saved her, healed her, and shown her a kindness she had never expected. She had no way to repay him, no words to capture the depth of her gratitude. With a final nod, she stepped away, disappearing into the crowd, but carrying a piece of him with her, a human's kindness, strength, and compassion etched forever into her soul. As she walked away, her heart felt a strange weight she hadn't anticipated. The world around her bustled with activity, other beings brushing past, the hum of ships taking off and landing echoing through the station. She could feel the eyes of her people on her as they scanned her appearance, battle-worn and weary, yet unmistakably alive. They recognized her at once, rushing forward to assist, to whisk her away to safety. But her thoughts lingered on the man she had left behind, still standing by the entrance to his ship, watching her fade into the crowd. Days turned into weeks, and she returned to her duties, resuming her role as a diplomat. But even amid the intense meetings and endless discussions, her mind would drift to the human who had saved her. She had left so quickly, so eager to rejoin her people and assure them she was unharmed, that she had barely thanked him for risking his life to protect hers. The thought gnawed at her, a persistent ache in her heart. Finally, she could bear it no longer. She reached out through a network of intergalactic communication nodes, hoping to find some trace of him. It was a long shot. Human ships rarely ventured into the deep sectors of space where she worked. Still, she sent a message through channels accessible to humans, a brief signal, containing only a simple phrase in the hopes that it would reach him. "Thank you. I will remember." Months passed with no response, and she eventually resigned herself to the thought that he had continued on his journey, somewhere far beyond her reach. She threw herself into her work, hoping it would help her forget, but every now and then, she would find herself gazing out at the stars, wondering if he was doing the same. And then, one quiet night as she prepared to rest, a message came through. The screen lit up with a small, encrypted file bearing the insignia of a human fleet. Her heart raced as she opened it, the text short but unmistakable. "It was my honor to meet you. The stars will always keep us close." From that point, they began to exchange messages, brief snippets that grew longer over time, sharing stories of their worlds, their cultures, their daily lives. Across the stars, they forged a bond that defied distance and language. He became her anchor on the far edges of the galaxy, a connection that reminded her of the kindness she had found when she was alone and vulnerable. But the galaxy was vast and unpredictable, and soon, she faced a new crisis. A faction that had long opposed her people began to stir, launching sudden attacks that disrupted alliances and threatened the fragile peace she had spent so long working to establish. Tensions were high, and diplomats from across sectors gathered, each vying to prevent a full-scale conflict. One evening, as she prepared her notes for yet another grueling negotiation, she received an urgent message. It was from him. "I have received word of the tension near your sector. My people are concerned for your safety. I'm requesting permission to join as part of the neutral delegation." Her heart leaped, caught between anticipation and worry. She knew the danger he would face, but a part of her longed to see him, to be near the one soul in the galaxy who understood her without words. She hesitated, torn by her duty and her longing, but after a moment she replied, permitting him to join the delegation. Days later, his ship arrived on the edge of the neutral space zone where the delegations gathered. She waited by the docking bay, her heart racing as she watched the ships land one by one. When his ship's hatch opened and he stepped out, they locked eyes, and for a brief moment, the chaos of the galaxy seemed to fade away. They spoke in hushed tones, finding moments to share quiet conversations amidst the tension of the negotiations. His presence was a steadying force, and she felt a renewed strength in her purpose. Together, they navigated the complex talks, bridging differences that had once seemed insurmountable. He spoke on behalf of his people, and she for hers, each extending a hand across the divide. But one night, as they walked the dimly lit corridors of the station, he turned to her, a look of resolve in his eyes. "You know that even if we succeed here, there are those who will never accept peace. You'll still be in danger," he said, his voice low and laced with concern. She nodded, understanding the risks all too well. "It's my duty. I was raised to bring unity, even if it means walking into danger." A shadow passed over his face. "And if I told you that I didn't want you to face it alone?" Her breath caught, his words resonating deep within her. She had never let herself imagine a life outside of her duty, but here he was, offering her a choice she hadn't known she could have. But before she could respond, an alarm blared through the corridors. Red lights flashed, and a voice crackled over the intercom. "Warning. Unidentified vessels approaching. All delegates, prepare for evacuation." In an instant, the peace they had fought for was shattered. Chaos erupted as the hostile forces attacked, sending shockwaves through the station. Together, they navigated the frantic corridors, dodging falling debris and rushing to help those trapped or injured. But as they neared the escape pods, a blast shook the station, and a massive chunk of debris fell between them, separating them. "Go!" she shouted, motioning for him to take the nearest pod. But he shook his head, his gaze fierce as he reached across the divide, refusing to leave her behind. In that moment, she saw in his eyes all the words he had never spoken. She knew, then, that they were more than two souls who had crossed paths in the vast expanse of space. They were bound, not just by fate, but by a love that had grown silently, spanning galaxies and overcoming barriers they had once believed insurmountable. With a final surge of strength, they managed to reach a single escape pod together. As they jettisoned away from the collapsing station, she clung to him, feeling the warmth of his presence as the stars stretched out before them. They drifted in the small pod, watching as the station disappeared into the void. She could feel the weight of everything that had been left behind, the responsibility she had carried for so long. But with him beside her, that weight felt lighter. In the silence, he took her hand, pulling her close as he murmured words that filled the emptiness between them. "Wherever you are, that's where I'll be." And as they drifted into the stars, she realized that home was no longer a place among the galaxies or the world she had visited. It was here, in his arms, where she had found a love that would outlast the stars themselves.